right, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Alice Casagranes-Esconeto, and I'm honored to moderate our second CMBES Women in STEM webinar of 2026 in celebration of International Women's Day. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining today from Vancouver, British Columbia, on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I would like to invite you all to pause for 5 seconds and reflect on whose lands you are today and what that means to you. And if possible, share with us via chat where you're attending from today. International Women's Day reminds us how essential women's leadership and innovation are in engineering and clinical technology, and how important it is to continue removing barriers to equity in our field. So it's my pleasure to introduce you today's speaker, Verna Manty Rodriguez, an exceptional engineering and medtech leader, and also one of my wonderful mother-in-law. Verna is the executive director of the Masters in Translational Medicine Program at UC Berkeley and UC San Francisco, and her career spans industry, academia, and consulting, including engineering roles at Edwards Lifescience, Abbott Vascular, and Boston Scientific. And she also holds 3 US patents. In today's talk, Leading When It's Hard, Engineering Courage in High-Stakes Systems, it draws on Verna's experience navigating medical device manufacturing crisis early in her career, and she will share some practical lessons on elevating critical signals, strengthening feedback loops between hospitals and manufacturers, and leading with clarity and courage when systems are under pressure. So please join me in welcome Verna today.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you to CMBES for this invitation. I'm just really thrilled because being asked to speak not only for International Women's Day, but also during this month, which is Women's History Month, a month that exists precisely to recognize contributions of women who've showed up in rooms where they haven't necessarily always been expected to be. That really means a lot to me, so thank you. So, what I want to tell you about today is a moment in my career that changed everything about how I understand leadership. I had just been promoted to the Director of Process and Manufacturing Engineering at a large company, Guidant, which is now actually part of Abbott Vascular. It was a really big role. I'd been a manager for several years up until then, and it was years in the making. So I was reporting to a vice president for the first time. I was 42, I was a single mom, and I was really proud. And then I walked into the job. The product that we were manufacturing at this division was a AAA implant, which is an abdominal aortic aneurysm repair device. It's actually something that is delivered with a catheter. So what you see here on the right with this implant is something that is made out of fabric and is got markers on it. It's got nitinol hooks that you can see at each end. So basically what it does is delivered percutaneously through a catheter in the up through the groin and into the aorta. So for people who have this ballooning out, where they're at risk of a burst in their aortic path, this lines that area without having to have an open procedure to replace the aorta there. So this was extremely beneficial for patients who often with this kind of condition are too sick to have open surgery, or they go through it anyway and they have about a 50% risk of dying. So there was no option to fail on this kind of a product. These patients really had no other path at the time because this was back in 2000. So within a very short time of stepping into that role, I'd only been there for, I think, a few weeks. One of my floor manufacturing support engineers came to me and said that the manufacturing line was down. I asked them why, and they said they couldn't complete a manufacturing step because it would require changing a setting on a machine. So coming from a different division, I knew that, that was very unusual. And so I said, well, what's the allowable range for that setting? He told me there was no range. So a little bit of a of a hesitation in my breath, and I thought, and I said, well, what's the process been validated to? He looked confused. He didn't know. I said, well, there must be a validation report. So let's go get that from document control. It couldn't be found. So then, still, these things were layering in terms of my anxiety ranking up. I thought again and I said, well, let's go look for what's been filed with the FDA, the US FDA here. And then going through that and uncovering it, that's when I really understood the full scope of what I'd walked into. And it was something that I knew was extremely difficult. But I went to the president of the division, which was fortunately someone that I had worked with before in another division, and I had a trusting relationship with her. And I told her we do not have a fully validated product line, and we're going to have to validate from the ground up. You can imagine she was like, "Are you sure, Verna? Do we have to validate this?" And I pulled out the regulation and I said, "Yes, these steps are not steps that can be fully verified." And so it says right here that we have to, per regulation, we have to validate these steps. And the deeper that I dug, the worse it got. Missing validation reports, equipment, maintenance records that didn't exist. There was calibration documentation, but it was like either confusing or there were certain calibration records for one machine, but not a duplicative machine. This means foundational documents missing. The product came off the market ultimately pretty quickly. And then on top of that, there were thousands of complaints that had to be documented to review and to submit to the FDA. There was regulatory pressure from multiple directions. And I knew that validating a whole manufacturing line like this, which meant not just the implant that I showed you, but also the delivery device, which is a very complicated catheter, that typically takes 6 months to a year for a manufacturer to do. They were demanding, management was demanding we need to do this in 3 to 4 months because if we had the product off the market for 6 months to a year, we would have no more revenue. This product would be gone. We wouldn't be able to have to go on and to pay employees, obviously, to continue. So we had to do this entirely from scratch for a device that patients needed to live. And then one day I came also to pile on more. I came back to my desk one day and I had a message from one of my employees. And he said in his message that the Department of Justice, the DOJ of the United States, had called him, and should he call them back? I remember sitting there after I listened to that message, and there was a pit in my stomach and panic in my heart and tightness in my chest. It was immediate. I was new. I wasn't fully trusted yet by everyone around me. There were people in the organization who had not responded well to quality concerns that had been raised. And this employee had been one of the people raising them. He reached out to me anyway. After that message, I sat with it for a while. I thought about what can I do next? I contacted my in-house attorney and I called him back. I thanked him for letting me know, and I connected him with our in-house attorney. And that's it. That was the whole decision. But I want you to notice something. The pit in my stomach, that panic, and all those little panics along the way, those came first. Clarity came after. And that is how courage actually works. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is what you do after the fear shows up. So let me paint the full picture of what this environment looked like. This was well before I knew Alice and well before I knew my current husband. Physicians were furious with this situation. They had patients that needed them, and they had open procedures that they were going to have to do. But they had procedures that they had scheduled with this much more minimally invasive device, and the device was not available. Sales was under furious pressure. Our own medical affairs director, in one of our meetings of executive team, literally broke down in tears. I was in a new role, and I had unknowingly walked into a non-compliance mess that predated me. And from this picture, you can see I was a single mom. This is from me back from that time. I had two small children. I was bringing them into the office after hours because we had simply no other option. We had thousands of complaints to document and eventually send into the FDA. This was way more than our complaints department could handle. We were asked as management to work on complaints to get them up to snuff. In the meantime, I was bringing my children into the office after hours with me because dinner would be brought in to us and we would work. And my children would play and draw things on the whiteboard. But there was something else also keeping me going that I haven't told you about, if you don't think that was enough. At the very same time that all this was happening, my stepfather needed surgery. He had an abdominal aortic aneurysm. And what I heard from my mom was that the plan was to do an open procedure on him, and I knew what that meant. Um, they had planned that because there was no competitive devices available in his size, but our device did have his size. I looked into it. So I connected him with a surgeon, and my stepfather was treated with the very device that I was fighting to bring back. And he carried that device for over a decade, for about 15 years, with no issue, until he passed from heart disease years later of other issues unrelated to the aneurysm. So during every single week of that crisis, every Friday night, I cried. And every Monday morning, I asked, what could I do next? Because I knew exactly whose face I was working for. It was the face like him. There was so many people out there. And that was the worst job I ever had for those 1.5 to 2 years. And it was the best job I ever had. And I'll tell you this, nothing since then has ever seemed undoable or unaccomplishable to me. Not one thing. What do I know and what can I do next? Every Friday night, I would go home and cry. I would literally weep. It would give me relief just from the stress of the week. And every morning I would come back and I'd ask that question, not why is this happening to me? How did I end up here? Although believe me, there was those committee members in my head as well. But this overriding question was this, what do I know now and what can I do next? It is the most engineering question that I know. You isolate what is certain, you identify the next variable that you can control, and you move the system forward one step. This is not a leadership book answer. It's not something you're going to read about in some Harvard Business Review. And that is what you do when the stakes are real. When the documents are missing, a federal investigation is touching your employees and your team, and your children are literally eating takeout in your office. And something out there, somewhere out there at the same time, is a patient who needs the device that you're responsible for bringing back. This what can I do next question is what got me through every single week. And I want to suggest something to you today. You already know this question. Every time a device behaves unexpectedly, every time a maintenance record doesn't add up, and every time something in your gut tells you something isn't right, as an engineer, as a technician, you are already asking this in your head. But first, let me tell you what that crisis taught me about the systems we work in and about whose voices need to be heard inside of them. What I walked into wasn't a bad product. It was a broken system. And systems don't fail just because of one bad actor. I mean, believe me, there were several that obviously led up to this, okay? And it's not because of one bad decision. They fail when the feedback loops are weak, when systems and signals exist, but then those signals are not heard. People aren't heard. They're not listened to. Complaint backlogs are not administrative burden, although sometimes people feel like it. They are data. And post-market signals from hospitals are system intelligence. The people managing the devices in the field, they often see failure before anyone else does. It's folks like you. You manage devices in hospitals every day. You are not peripheral to this system. You are the feedback loop. But here is what I learned about what happens when that feedback loop gets blocked. In that crisis that I just talked you through, warning signals had been present for some time. Employees that I kind of had mentioned to you had raised quality concerns. They had raised it for months, maybe even a year or more, and they had not been heard or they had not been addressed at all. That is not a people problem. That is a systems design problem. Is it a management structural problem? When hierarchy overrides technical voice, risks compound silently. The person with the title is not always the person with the clearest signal. It's usually those folks that are on the floor. It's folks like you that are with the equipment and with the patients. And silence in a technical system is not neutral. It is dangerous. So I want to tell you that inclusion is not a moral aspiration. It is a safety mechanism. I want you to sit with that a moment because I'm not talking about a diversity initiative. Yes, those exist. I'm in favor of these kind of diversity initiatives myself, but it's because I'm talking about the need for system robustness. When certain voices are structurally quieted, systems become fragile. And when those voices are heard, systems become resilient. So, what do you do when you're standing in the middle of a fragile system with incomplete information, with real stakes, and no guarantee of the outcome? I can tell you exactly what it looked like for me. Not loud, not glamorous, and not certain. It looked like this: showing up on Monday, processing one more complaint, fixing one more feedback loop, stabilizing another variable, asking my engineers and team to do the same, making one decision, one step every week for months. And that is engineering courage. It's not a feeling, it's a practice. And I want to suggest something. Engineers, like all of you, are built for it because you already know how to move forward one variable at a time. You do it every single day. And here is the framework underneath all of it, one that you will recognize immediately. Look at the 4 steps on this screen: uncertainty, target experiment, decision, direction. This is not a leadership framework that I invented. This is the engineering method applied to fear. Every time a device behaves unexpectedly, you do this. Every time a maintenance finding doesn't add up, you do this. Every time something is wrong and you have to figure out the next move, you do this. You don't wait for certainty. You isolate variables, you test, you decide, you move. You already know how to lead under uncertainty, and you do it with devices and with patients and clinicians in your whole ecosystem every day. The only question is whether you trust yourself to do it with people and systems too. I had to learn to trust myself also a second time in a completely different environment. But before I continue on that, this was obviously a very uh, in-depth, detailed story, and I want to pause here for just a moment. So if there's anything so far that sparked a question, I want you to drop it in the chat now, and Alice will collect them for us at the end. So we should have plenty of time to address questions at the end. Okay. So fast forward several years, just I think about 8 years ago now. I was invited to give a guest lecture at Santa Clara University. I had just come out of a startup that had been successful. It had been sold off a couple times, and basically we were handing it over to that team. And I was looking to basically really retire or go part-time. And I was already doing a little bit of consulting. I started my consulting company because there were several folks out in the industry who said, "Oh, you're not at another company. Would you do consulting for us?" And our startup. But I was also asked right before I left to give a guest lecture. And this guest lecture came about because I was at a startup and we had a new technology. It was a completely different space than cardiovascular where I'd been working. So for the last few years of my career in industry, it was on a lung device. So I was excited to do it, but I was a little hesitant because I thought, well, I might find it draining. I don't know if students are going to respond to me. And I was so surprised. I found it unexpectedly energizing. Something about translating complex technical experience into direction for the next generation felt really meaningful to me. And the lecture went so well. I brought one of my new engineers who'd just been with us for a year. I brought him along with me because he'd created this simulation model for training doctors. And I wanted the students to see what you could do when you were just a year out of school. And it gave him a chance to demo the product that he had worked on and show how it worked. And I also did a little history of the company. Well, that turned into me being asked to teach a course at Santa Clara University. And again, I was really like, well, I don't have a, master's even, much less a PhD. The department chair said, we don't care. We don't need that. We have enough PhDs. So I was like kind of surprised. But I thought, okay, well, think I could do that then. And I said, well, what do you want me to teach? And he said, you tell us. That was an opportunity that I leaned into because after years of being a manager, I thought I know exactly what engineers need to get it when they come out of school to be able to get an interview. And I knew it was going to be design control because it wasn't taught, but it was widely needed. And it was some of the things from my crisis, years before that I knew engineers needed to know. And as managers, students would, could get hired. So I went on for that for almost 4 years. And then shortly after, I applied for this role that I'm in now, Executive Director for the Master in Translational Medicine here at UC Berkeley, which is my alma mater, and also UCSF. It's a program at the intersection of engineering, medicine, and innovation. So like I said, I don't have a PhD, I don't have an MD, and I don't have a master's. And I almost talked myself out of applying because of that. But those people who recognized what I had made me relook at myself. And I kept coming back to the same question. What do I know and what can I do next? And at that point, it was more like, I have a vision. I know what I could do. It was the same crisis, but it was a different environment. Same question. I stopped waiting to feel credentialed enough. There was no credentialed enough. There was only the work, there was only this vision I had for building one of the best programs in the United States and maybe even worldwide. And when I look back across both of those moments, the manufacturing crisis and also the academic pivot, I see the same four things required every single time. Both moments required the same things. Okay? Look at the four quadrants on the screen. Step forward before certainty arrives. Translate technical knowledge into direction for others. Speak up in rooms where others hesitate and own it. Full responsibility, even if you don't have full authority. These are not personality traits you either have or don't have. They are practiced behaviors. I was not always this way and always as confident, but I would take risks when I felt like it was worth it. And they're also available to every person here on this webinar, regardless of your title, regardless of your degree, regardless of how long you have been in your role. Leadership is not a destination. You arrive at it. It's a decision that you make, and usually when things are the hardest. I want to speak now directly to what you do every day. Medical devices do not end at manufacturing and FDA clearance. It is the starting point of when real-world performance begins. What does that mean? It means that the maintenance logs that you keep are system intelligence. The service reports you file, those are early warning data. The anomalies that you flag are potential signals that manufacturers need to hear. You are not peripheral to the device life cycle. You are one of the most critical nodes. I know because even though if I haven't met you, I've seen those data come back into manufacturing organizations. In that crisis 25 years ago that I told you about, signals had existed in the field. Had those signals been elevated and heard earlier, the story might have been different. Your voice in the system matters more than you may even realize. And I want to tell you something about my own team during that crisis. When we eventually moved the manufacturing overseas, we had to do that because only about 50% of sales came back. And so in order to get revenue so that we could, maintain our division, we were going to have to do that. That means we were going to have to train engineers from Puerto Rico who would fly here, and my manufacturing engineers and process engineers would train them. So what I did is I had to tell them what was happening. But I could have punted it down the road or, let it stay silent for a while. I told them the truth. I told them that we were going to move and that basically we were going to shut down the plant here. And I told them I would be understanding completely if they wanted to find another role, that their work mattered regardless, that it was going to be really hard and long hours, but they would learn a lot and I would support them all the way. Regardless what happened to the product, I'd help them get future jobs when this was over. None of them left. I had like a dozen engineers working for me, none left. And that taught me something that I have never forgotten. People don't stay for products. They stay for truth and they stay for leaders who trust them enough to tell it. You are not just managing equipment, you are managing system intelligence, and how you show up in your role matters. With honesty, diligence, and the courage to raise signals nobody wants to hear, whether your title says so or not. So, slower, more deliberate. I want to say something directly to you now. To the women in this room, especially, though I think men are also going to recognize this too. Women in technical roles are frequently over-relied upon and under-recognized. We are often asked to do the hard work, the report writing, to carry institutional knowledge, and to train new people. Also to fix broken systems. And then too often we are not in the room when decisions get made about those systems. But I want to reframe something for you. Visibility is not ego. When you raise a concern about a device, that is not being difficult. That is risk management. When you document an anomaly that others wave off, that is not being overly cautious. That is system intelligence. And when you apply for the role that you're not sure you're ready for, that is not arrogance. That is exactly what the system needs from you. In that crisis, the employees who left me that voicemail, the one that I told you about, he'd been raising quality concerns for some time. He had not been heard. Okay. And the cost of that silence to patients, to the company, to the people who depended on that device, it was enormous. His voice mattered. Your voice matters, not as a sentiment and not as a slogan, as an engineering reality. Diverse technical perspectives catch failure modes that homogeneous teams miss, but inclusive systems are more robust systems. And that is not culture work, that is engineering. So when someone tells you explicitly or implicitly that your signal doesn't matter, that your concern is an overreaction, or that you should wait your turn, that you need one more credential before you can belong in that room, I want you to remember something. Foundational documents were missing, and nobody said anything until somebody did. Be the person who says something. Let's see. Okay. I want to close with something direct. For every woman in this room, and for everyone who's ever supported a woman trying to find her footing in a technical field, you will inherit broken systems. That is not a possibility, it is certainty, as long as you've been working long enough. And you won't feel ready, not for the promotion, not for the hard conversation, and not for the moment when someone brings you a voicemail that makes your stomach tighten up. You will have times when you go home and cry. I did every Friday night for weeks and months. And I want you to know that did not make me less of a leader. It made me human. And it made me come back on Monday. And let me tell you what else happened. I navigated, obviously, these things I told you about. I navigated this whole federal investigation, touching my own team. I kept every single one of my engineers. None of them quit. I hired 15 to 18 external resources to get that validation going. We had to train all of them on the product to help us revalidate it from the ground up. We had to train and we had to update SOPs and work instructions to be able to make this whole validation. I trained a whole offshore team of Puerto Rican engineers. There was even cultural differences to move manufacturing and keep the product alive. And at the end of it, this may shock you, I received a needs improvement review, and I was eventually laid off. I was crushed. And then I also sat with it because I was working for my new VP and the president. These are both women that I respected. Even if I didn't feel like this was fair, I knew something with complete certainty. I had done absolutely my very best. I could not have done better, not at that point in my career and not with what I had been given. That review, it was the only bad review I've ever had. And that review did not define what I had done. It defined the gap between what was expected and what was humanly possible in that situation. Those are not the same thing. And so your VP and your president will not always see you clearly. Your manager, institutions will not always reward you for what they most need from you. But I asked my VP and president directly. I said, well, this is a terrible review. I said, and I'm getting laid off. Would you consider me rehirable again? And they said without any pause, like, yes, of course. Okay, so I knew I hadn't broken trust with them. There's probably political things going on. Someone has to take the fall. I don't know completely because this was 25 years ago and I was still, fairly young in these kind of roles. But it was still a gut punch. It was not fair. I knew what I was and what I had done. That knowledge is yours to keep. No review can take it away. No layoff can take it away. No institutional failure to recognize your contribution can take it away. That does not disqualify you from leadership. It could be the making of it for you. Because here is what I know after 40 years in this field. The leaders who changed things were not the ones who waited until they felt certain. They were the ones who asked, what do I know and what can I do next? And then they did it anyway. Afraid, uncertain, underprepared for someone else's measure, and absolutely necessary. So know your own work. Know your own worth. You are absolutely necessary. And keep going. Because this whole healthcare field, it's always topsy-turvy, and we need all of you. The systems we work in are complex. The stakes are real. And when it's hard, that's when leadership actually begins. I know because I lived it in a manufacturing facility where missing validation documents were nowhere to be found, federal investigation, small children, my stepfather whose life depended on it, and I was responsible for bringing it back. And I know because every one of you lives it too, in your hospitals, with your devices, with your manufacturing logs and your service reports, and the concerns that you raise that don't often get heard the first time. You are doing work that matters in ways you will not always see, in ways that sometimes only become clear maybe 25 years later. But keep going. Thank you.
Thank you, Verna. What an inspiring talk. Appreciate you for sharing your wisdom with us today. As Verna reminded us, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to either use the chat or the Q&A box. And Verna, we have a question in the Q&A already for you.
Okay.
Marita is asking, Verna, what finally made you feel like the crisis was turning a corner?
So during that manufacturing process, I think I finally felt it was starting to turn a corner when I got approval to hire those external resources because it felt like I knew that it was an impossible task before them. But when I was able to convince management that the only way to start to solve this problem was to hire these people and to get them trained, that is when I felt like there was more help on the way and we could do it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Verna?
I can stop sharing now so I could perhaps see folks. I noticed that there's some things in the chat. Um, okay, good. It was just echo stuff. Yeah.
We have a new question in the chat there from
Okay.
Amalia. Did you have
Um,
any other supports during the crisis or throughout life?
oh, support. Goodness. Oh, yes. So during that time, being a someone, yes, I ended up getting all kinds of support because it was a lot. I ended up making sure, because I was making good money then, I hired a gardener for my yard. I had a nanny and I had a maid. And so those were critical because I would be exhausted and I wanted to have time with my kids. So basically, I spent that money during those few years because I said, this is for me to survive and to be able to have time with my kids and to be able to be sane during work. And I think I also had, I think during that, I'm pretty sure was also seeking counseling was helping too. So all those were major support. Good question. Yes, people think, "Oh yeah, you do it all, Verna." I go, "No. I had lots of people." And pretty much all those people were mostly women that were helping, right? Because a lot of times it's oftentimes women that are in the support roles, not always. I mean, I've had so many men that were probably my biggest champions, but those were my support people.
Yeah,
Absolutely, Marie. It
Marianne
takes a
said it takes a
village.
village. I agree.
It
Yes.
takes a village.
All right, we have a few more questions here in the Q&A now from an anonymous attendee. Verna, thank you for the inspiring talk. Did you struggle with self-doubt during that time? And what ways were you able to tackle, if yes?
Um, what ways was I able to tackle self-doubt? Really good question. The way was really, I did have, like, I think I mentioned those kind of small questions of like, uh, how did I get in this role, blah, blah, blah. And then I thought, no, I know how to do these things. Um, but I had the option, of course, of quitting, you know? I mean, obviously my engineers did too, but it was really the patience in my mind. I was thinking, I know how to do this and I know what's right. And that is really what kept me going. And I thought like I really felt like I got this job for a reason, especially I think with my father-in-law. I felt like it was destiny, or I felt like it was my path. And that was really what kept me going. I mean, it might not have been for anybody else, but it really made me feel like I had purpose that really mattered.
Thank you, Verna. Sonia Pinkney, hi Sonia, nice to see you here, said she loves your emphasis on the importance of speaking up and owning it. Unfortunately, there are no shortage of issues, and one challenge is that we cannot do it all, especially working in a healthcare system. Any advice on prioritizing in that case?
Yes. So what I did also, because even though I had all those people helping on that manufacturing line, what I pulled from was risk management. And risk management, there's a lot of regulations out there around risk management. I pulled from 14971 and applying it, and I think it's also can be pulled probably in hospitals as well. Is you do an analysis of all the issues you have and prioritize them by risk in terms of what kinds of things have the highest risk. And the way you um, basically prioritize risk is you determine that it is what is the harm that's possible and what is the occurrence, possible occurrence of that harm. So something might result in death. Well, that's terrible. Okay, you're going to say that's awful. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's the highest risk because it may be something that, well, we think it's going to be 1 in a million, as opposed to maybe a risk of maybe heavy bleeding, but maybe there's like a lot of occurrence of that. And you'd say, okay, that's high risk because if we've got a pretty serious bleed and it's happening, we think it could happen 1 in 100 times. We think that's high enough to where it's uh, very high rated risk. So I recommend looking at things through a risk management lens. 14971 is good for that. The other thing, what I've done with things where I came into a job, because another director job I had after this one was there was like literally like about 90 to 100 task items that had not been organized. They go, oh, well, this small group of 4 engineers you have, this is their whole task list. So I did another method there, partially based on risk, but also other areas in terms of what's important to the business. Um, I used what's called a Kepner-Trigo analysis, and basically you take a whole list of all of your things. You get buy-in from your management or your different functional groups in terms of what kinds of criteria you want to use for grading these particular tasks. And then everybody cross-functionally grades these tasks against the criteria. And then from that, you come up with this ranked order of what projects you're going to work on first. And you might even find some that really are best belong under some other department. Really, it's not really your functional role. Um, but I've used that quite a bit. It's really helpful. And you can look for ranking systems and things out there. Kepner, like I said, Kepner-Trigo. There's another word for it as well. And I could send it to Alice or whatever. It just doesn't come to me right now. But it's a really helpful ranking system when you have way too much work, and you need to prioritize, but you need to prioritize it strategically with other folks so that everyone buys into the ranking.
Makes sense. Thank you, Verna.
Mhm.
Carol Davis Smith says she appreciates that all of your comments apply to individual contributors as well as those who hold management roles. And leadership is not a synonym for management. So thank you for sharing your time, experience, and insights.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment.
And Marianne says she loves that you went to academia after your industry career. And do you have any advice on how to do this transition if we don't have a particularly academic path? What should we focus on first? Publications, research, or
Mm,
solidify contacts/network and take the leap?
yes. So I would say that lean into any of those opportunities that arise. Um, Usually, other than publications are all helpful, but right now in the world, I see a lot of universities that are looking to bridge um, industry and academia. And so I think it's kind of a little bit for me, right time and right place. Berkeley has been leaning into this for like the last 15 years now, but other universities are also realizing that funding and stuff, at least in the US, funding is flowing when there are basically real translational um, ways to move technology forward, meaning translating from benchtop science and, in my case, we do drugs and we do devices, translating that into full commercial product. So not just in the early research stage, but really focusing on what things translate to, consumers and the community and the broader patient population. So I've seen most people start with a guest lecture, or you might start with an organization that is already somewhat tied to students. I see a lot of folks at Berkeley and other UC, University of California institutions have been peripherally engaged with I-Corps, which is one of these entrepreneurial types of organizations that shows people how to translate um, innovation into real world products. So I would say look at opportunities to be in clubs, organizations where you're in contact with students, and it could be also guest lecturing and advising. I think I started also by advising um, senior students design projects. So anywhere where you have some expertise and when you're asked to speak or you're asked to, um, come and help out with a senior design team or with students, student advising, you'll be able to hopefully be welcomed with open arms because there's just not enough people helping out, I think, in universities.
Thank you, Verna. And I also have a question, but I'm not allowed to type on the Q&A for some reason, I guess because I'm a co-host.
Yes.
So many women tend to be quite self-sacrificing, and often they feel like they are being a burden when they ask for help. You mentioned that you had support in different ways throughout your journey. So what advice would you give to women who struggle with reaching out for support?
I would say that you have to ask anyway. Um, I would say actually, I would really recommend a read that I had recently. It's a book by Brene Brown. It's called Daring Greatly. And the reason why I bring it up is because the book talks about vulnerability and it will reframe vulnerability for you in a different way that makes you understand how asking for help is not a weakness. It is actually addressing a real human need and being vulnerable, and people respond to that. People don't run away from it. And I think Brene Brown really goes into it and explains it really in detail with great storytelling, um, in a really, really helpful and constructive way for women, but also especially even for men. Because of men also suffer from feeling like they have to be the knight on the white horse. And if they step off of that, then the women in their lives are going to be disappointed or they're going to be um, not wanting to couple with them and feel like that they're a partner. And so I think all of us struggle with true vulnerability, and I think really understanding how it's not a weakness, and how to frame it such that you're able to reach out anyway, find out the people you can trust. If there's people who don't respond well, that's data for you to say, all right, it's not your problem, it's their problem. And you just move on to people who you're going to be able to work with.
Thank you. Yeah, I like to say that most human beings are here to help each other. We're just here walking each other home.
Yes.
And uh, one of the things that we love doing the most is helping others. So if we don't ask for help, we are depriving them from the opportunity of doing what they love doing the most, right? So
Exactly. And also, when you keep yourself kind of isolated, people can interpret it as, not being part of community, as you're not really needing help. Um, and so you don't really connect and really get a full feeling about life and about helping people and being connected like you would if you're able to like partner. Because I mean, we're social beings, right? We're not wired to be on our own, and we obviously haven't survived for all of these thousands of years. But as individuals, we've survived as a village.
back to Marie-Ange's comment, it takes a village.
Hmm. Exactly.
All right. I don't see any other questions. We can wait another minute just to see if anyone has any lingering thoughts or questions, and then we can close off. All righty. Well, thank you again, Verna. CMBS is really honored to have you today. Really appreciate you for taking the time to share your knowledge and wisdom with us. Please come back.
Yes, ask anytime. It was my pleasure. And thanks so much for a wonderful audience to all of you. Carry
Thank
on.
you. Yes, thank you all for attending, and we'll see you in our next CMBS webinar.
Bye.
Bye.